about the moon. If you hate us and you hate today with ICE, and they said what they said. But anyway, let's bring in another call. We got a Mr. Caller coming on now. I want to get his thoughts about Dr. King. Mr. Caller, Grand Rising, Happy King Day.
To Martin Luther King for years, a holiday example. In officer,
Who's teaching us about what
he asked.
Fellas, how should we
of how we there are many who
thank both still sort of confounded how I'm just kind of what you call it.
Gregory, and for some of you out there who don't know, Dick Gregory helped several people. Brings me back in the break of dawn on.
Going on.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, family. That's Reverend Dr. Paul Smith, Canon Leonard Hamlin, some of the Dr. King's disciples teaching us about what Dr. King, how he got over and telling the folks to be this nonviolence. And of course, they equated what's going on in Minneapolis today with ICE. And, they said what they said. But anyway, let's bring in another call. We got a Mr. Caller coming on now. I want to get his thoughts about Dr. King. Mr. Caller, Grand Rising, Happy King Day. Welcome back to the program.
And who would that be, sir?
That would be one Mark from Anaheim. Grand Rising.
Oh, God. Do you realize it's like not even the break of dawn on the West Coast? Good morning, listeners. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Just when I thought I was out, Carl Nelson brings me back in again. But it's definitely for good reasons. And in memory of Dick Gregory, for some of you out there who don't know, Dick Gregory helped several people write books about Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and assassination investigation. And I have some personal experiences directly related to the King family that, I could share with the listeners this morning, but hopefully the callers out there will call in and tell us what Martin Luther King Jr. Day means to you. Now, just one of the things, I talked to Mr. Nelson this past weekend. In 1994, I was on the air live with Mr. Nelson here in L.A. because it was Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And I told Mr. Nelson, I said, there are a lot of people this morning who despise Martin Luther King Jr., never supported the idea of a King holiday, and yet they are alive this morning because of Martin Luther King Jr. So Mr. Nelson said, well, explain yourself. For you folks who don't know, in 1994, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, that was the day that the Northridge earthquake struck Southern California. And I reminded Mr. Nelson and the listeners, had it not been for the fact that it was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, there would have been hundreds, if not thousands, of people on those freeways that collapsed that morning. And we suffered greatly out here. It was a devastating earthquake. And I mean, I've been through a whole lot of earthquakes, but that to this day is the worst earthquake I've ever encountered. And lots of lives were lost, astronomical damage for property. And yet, it would have been far greater if people had been going to school or work that morning when that earthquake struck. So I found it a little ironic. I wonder how many people out there, even today, who are decrying the fact that we have a national holiday for Martin Luther King Jr. are alive because they happen to have survived having been at home instead of being on the freeways. Remember those days, Mr. Nelson?
Of course, I remember we had a conversation and got knocked out of the seat, and we went off the air for about a minute or so, and we were back on, and then hey, it's an earthquake, and trying to find out what was going on with it across Southern California. Yeah, I remember that day, that morning.
What really infuriated me, so many things infuriated me during that time period, and one of the things that stands out for me was in the aftermath, and I should tell you folks this, the loss of life was not confined to Los Angeles County. Even several days and up to a couple of weeks, there were people still dying in places like Ventura County because that earthquake had shaken the ground and apparently had released spores and flu viruses that had been buried in the dirt for years. and because Ventura County was downwind from where the earthquake struck, there were approximately 200 people who became violently ill, and I believe maybe 3 to 5 people in Ventura County died indirectly related to that earthquake. So it wasn't just confined to property damage here in L.A. County, because it was primarily L.A. County, but I mean, we felt it everywhere. It was a bad earthquake. What's also ironic is that to the day, same size earthquake struck in Japan a year later. So I found that ironic too. But what I was going to say, Mr. Nelson, one of the things that really infuriated me in the aftermath, in the black and brown communities, people were being told how they could, how to apply for emergency food stamps, welfare. And I will never discuss anything on this radio show that I don't personally know. Meanwhile, in white communities, they were being instructed on how to get state and federal loans. And I won't name the facility, but I saw with my own eyes firsthand hundreds of white contractors gathered in this one city building, City of Los Angeles building, all white, no blacks, no browns, all white contractors being told how they can get contracts to help rebuild. Primarily San Fernando Valley was the one that was struck. And I'm like, what about the black and brown contractors? This was 1994, folks. I'm not talking 1927. I saw this with my own eyes. But there's so much about King's Day that I can tell you about L.A. because, people think California is so liberal. I'll give you just one example. Tom Bradley was the mayor. Now, he was a retired LAPD cop. Celeste King and other people were successful in getting Martin Luther King Jr. Day established as a national holiday. Now, in Los Angeles, primarily South Los Angeles, the original name of the street was Santa Barbara Avenue. Santa Barbara Avenue was changed to Martin Luther King Boulevard for years. And yet, up until 1989, I still found LAPD phone directories where they refused to change the name from Santa Barbara Avenue to Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. I'm not making this stuff up, folks. I walked into one LAPD station, front desk, where anybody in the public can walk in, and somebody had scrawled out Martin Luther King Jr. Day on the calendar behind the police officers working the front desk and had written in James Earl Ray Day. Now, Mr. Nelson, he's heard these stories. Dick Gregory and Carl and I, we used to talk about a whole lot of stuff that people have no idea. And let's bring it up more recently. Last year, Charlie Kirk was assassinated, tragic event, and they held this big rally and memorial for Charlie Kirk. Do you folks even know Arizona had no desire to make national holiday for King? And John McCain was vehemently against Martin Luther King Day in the state of Arizona. That stadium and these NFL games and the Super Bowl that sometimes played in Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a holiday in the state of Arizona. So I found it ironic that these folks are gathering for Charlie Kirk's memorial because I guarantee you most of those folks do not support Martin Luther King Jr. And yet that stadium probably wouldn't have been there had it not been for those backdoor deals and the compromise to finally get Martin Luther King Jr. Day recognized in Arizona. Mr. Knowles, I could go on and on with this kind of stuff. You know that, right?
Yeah, and I recall that 14 minutes at the top of their mark, man. I recall it because Stevie said he wouldn't do a concert again until they recognized one.
Brother Stevie.
Yeah, the King holiday.
He was not going to step foot. And by the way, you folks, if you don't know this, just for personal, when Barack Hussein Obama was elected, I didn't step foot in Nevada or Arizona or any other state. And by the way, I never voted for Barack Obama. Neither election did I vote for him because I don't vote. I'm an independent, which is what I want to address right now because you had somebody call in, wasn't Martin Luther King Jr. a Republican? I get so sick and tired of people spreading these misinformation. When Martin Luther King Jr. decided to support John F. Kennedy's presidential election campaign. He specifically became an independent. He was neither a Republican nor a Democratic. And Larry Elder, who's a black libertarian out here, he used to spew that garbage all the time, too. I'm no fan of Larry Elder, but I always give credit where credit's due. 10 years ago, I called Larry Elder out on that. He did some research, and on all of his official websites, he later conceded he could find no evidence that Martin Luther King Jr. was a Republican during the Civil Rights Movement. But you know, Mr. Nuss, I got some up-close and personal experiences regarding the King family, so we can talk about that too. So.
Yeah, I also got some people got questions for you. Let me take one first. At 15 after the top there, Eric's reaching out to us. He's calling from Long Beach, out in California. He's on line 1. A Grand Rising, Happy King Day. Eric, your question for Mark from Anaheim.
Grand Rising, Happy King Day.
Good morning, sir.
To your guests and yourself. It's been a long time since I've been on for the call airways with you, Mark. But let me start by saying, you know, me and Brother Coakley, rest in peace, was real close when he lived with Dr. Onion Palmer out here in L.A. I used to take him to a lot of his medical appointments that he had before he passed, you know. So just to let that be known.
Well, hold on before you go any further, brother. So my answer machine, I mean, I haven't used that answer machine in years. But the very last message on my answer machine was the last phone call that I received from Brother Steve Coakley.
Oh, well, I'm glad to know that. Unfortunately, I was out of town on a job in Washington when the brother passed.
Yeah, he was very ill at the time when he called me, and I was unable to. I was involved in some stuff where I was not able to meet with him, and I will I will always save that tape from that answer machine because that was the very last phone call that I had received from Steve Coakley before we lost that brother.
All right. Eric, hold your thought right there. We got to step aside for a few moments. Eric, I'll let you pose your question on the other side. 17 minutes after the top of our family. Mark from Anaheim is, I guess, let me just share this with you. A lot of stuff that you heard Steve Coakley say or Dick Gregory say, they got it from Mark from Anaheim. I can attest to that. You got questions for him, reach out to us at 800-450-7876. Enjoy your King Day, and we'll take your phone calls next. And Grand Rising, Happy King Day, family. 20 minutes after the top there, Mark from Anaheim is sharing some of his experiences and celebrating Dr. King's birthday. What are yours? You can reach us at 800-450-7876. Before we left, we're speaking with Eric calling us from Long Beach in California. So Eric, I'm letting you finish your question for Mark.
Okay, glad to be back. The reason I brought up, my dear mentor, Brother Coakley, because we used to be at the Marcus Garvey School out there, and we used to have, a lot of discussions into the King assassination for a long time. And one of the things that he and Dick Gregory pointed out and made clear was who was all involved in getting Martin out of that room onto that balcony so he can be shot. And those individuals have still not been held to account and to be reckoned with what they did. And one of them is still alive, Jesse Jackson, and Andrew Young. They all know what happened, but none of them has ever came clean on that issue. And the so-called black community ain't never pressed them on it, not once, ever. But we love to run out there and celebrate the brother, but the conspirators that helped get his life taken never been held to account. I just want to know Brother Mark's thoughts about that. Thank you, and I'll take the answer off the air. Appreciate it.
Oh, Mr. Nelson, why'd you bring me on this show this morning? All right, folks. One, I'll never lie to you. Two, since I have less years left on this planet than I've already experienced, I'm going to share with you that I've only shared with Greg and Carl Nelson. In response to the brother's question, I've been researching the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. since 1977. Because in 1977, I was staying in a dormitory in downtown Charleston, South Carolina. It was called a college lodge. I think it's closed now. And I realized that I was standing less than 100 yards from when on April 6, 1968, South Carolina National Guard with fixed bayonet M14 rifles pointed in my face and said, since we can't use that word on the radio, thank you, Marshall Clark, the N-word, keep walking. Now, the South Carolina National Guard had been deployed to protect the city and College of Charleston, basically all-white campus, against possible rioting because King had been assassinated 3 days earlier. So, back in 1968, open bigotry and segregation was still very prevalent in South Carolina. And that Saturday following King's assassination, I went to the long-gone all-black Lincoln Theater. Because back in those days, the Gloria Theater, Riviera Theater, the American Theater in downtown Charleston, they finally let blacks in, which I always found ironic, Mr. Nelson, because they created a colored section, and the colored section was in the balcony, which was the better seats. They did the same thing at the Grand Ole Opry back then, too. But anyway, the great thing about the Lincoln Theater, even though it didn't have the money like the white theaters, they showed black movies. I knew about Herb Jeffries. Anybody out there this morning know who Herb Jeffries was? Gene Autry is not my singing cowboy. Herb Jeffries is my singing cowboy, and he was a black man. And it's sad how so many people don't even know who Herb Jeffries is today. So I went to the theater. I watched a couple of black Western films, and I see this big commotion down King Street. Mind you, folks, I'm only 10 years old, so I don't know what's going on. So I started walking down King Street from the Lincoln Theater towards Calhoun Street. And when I got to the intersection of Calhoun Street and King Street is when the National Guard pointed bayonets in my face. I never returned to the College of Charleston campus again until I became a freshman there 9 years later. And I didn't know what was going on at that time. It didn't dawn on me until years later, like I had encountered National Guard protecting the white students at the College of Charleston. So to address your brother's questions, okay? I am very familiar with various organizations and individuals who were most likely involved. I don't focus on who did it. Rather, I focus on who benefits, and I keep things simple. You really want me to answer this question on the air, Mr. Nelson?
Like you said.
It is what it is.
Keep it simple.
He said what he
said. It is
said.
what it is. Yeah.
All right, folks. Martin Luther King Jr. was a member of Sigma Pi Phi. Some of you folks know them as the Boule. During the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King Jr. switched from fighting for civil rights to fighting for human rights for all people, not just black folks, especially the poor. So he was fighting for blacks. He was fighting for whites. He was fighting for browns. He was fighting for yellows. He was fighting for everybody. It was no longer a civil rights movement for Martin Luther King Jr. It was a human rights for all. Many within the Boule despised MLK, and they were jealous of him and wondering why he was considered the spokesperson for the civil rights movement. You had prominent Boule members like U.S. Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall and other well-known Boule members who would print anti-Martin Luther King Jr. editorials in major newspapers. And Mr. Nelson, of course, you knew one. Remember one guy who used to work for, was it U.S., wasn't it U.S. Information Agency? Carl Rowan?
Right.
Remember that name?
Oh, I'll never forget that name.
Folks, you guys have no idea. You better take advantage of Mr. Nelson and myself while we're still alive, because there's so much stuff that we know that nobody else is going to tell you. And I was just informed yesterday because I tried to warn you folks. Facebook apparently took down everything I've ever posted because there were people who listen to this show who contacted me and goes, yep, well, your information is gone. but I tried to tell you all to get it while you can. Anyway, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back was when MLK criticized the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. And he came out and said that the United States was the greatest purveyor of violence on the planet. See, now you're dealing with, and Mr. Nelson, it is not the military industrial complex. See, when Eisenhower came out and said that, and he waited until he was leaving the White House to say it, his original statement was the military industrial congressional complex. They took congressional out before you ever saw that speech. Okay? And that military industrial congressional complex has gotten bigger and bigger ever since. Everybody on that balcony pointing in the wrong direction was a Boule member. And the person kneeling down, I know you folks got your pencils and paper, his name was Merrill Mac McCullough. And Mac was CIA. His daughter, Leda, well, she's married now, so Leda McCullough, her name is Seletsky. She's even written a book, folks. You can find it. It's called The Kneeling Man. I'll never lie to you. And now they don't care anymore. It's been so long. They're putting out information. It's the guy kneeling while everybody else is pointing in the wrong direction where the shot came from. They were all Boule, and Mac, who's kneeling down, was CIA. In fact, we used to joke about this, but it's not funny. A certain individual on that balcony who's still alive wore a turtleneck to make sure that they didn't shoot the wrong N-word. Yeah, I just call a spade a spade. And I'm from South Carolina, just as he. Coretta Scott King wanted Josephine Baker to assume leadership of the Southern Christian Leadership Council. And I have coached and mentored female surfers from France and the French territories. And the reason why is because of the memory of the Harlem Hellfighters, the memory of Eartha Kitt, who just had a name day, Eugene Bullard, the Black Swallow, who was a legendary pilot that most of you never heard of, and Josephine Baker, because they are revered in France while they continue their memories are disrespected in this country. Well, there was no way that the Boule and the Southern Christian Leadership Council was going to let Josephine Baker take over. And that's why Josephine Baker today is interned in France, because she knew after everything she had done and everything she had sacrificed, she had already left the United States twice. One time she had even renounced her U.S. citizenship and had to fight to get it back. And when Coretta Scott King asked her to try to become the leader of the SCLC, and she saw how she was being treated, she remained in France. And that's where she is today. So I keep it simple, folks. And while many black folks love to discuss the white separatist groups and the various local, state, and federal government agencies which may have been complicit, as Eric from Long Beach says, rarely do black folks discuss the complicity of other black folks. Hell, it was black folks who requested the assassination, the files don't be released until 2027. And I doubt they're going to be released because some of those black complicit, those individuals, they're still alive and will probably still be alive in 2027. So I hope that answered Eric's question.
Yeah. 29 away from the top of the hour, family. Happy King Day. Mark now. Making an appearance.
So the list is about Mr. Boule, Michael Steele, and how he was nothing but a house Negro for the Republican Party, and your switchboard blew up. And then the Republican Party came out later and even said, "Oh, Michael Steele was just a token Negro for us." Yeah,
that's why we can't get him. Yeah, that's why we can't get him back on the show. Thanks, Mark. But anyway, 28 away from the top. I got to ask you this question. We discussed it earlier. The Kennedys' role in the assassination of Martin Luther King, because back in the day, even in my house, we had the picture of the two Kennedys and Martin King on the wall, and I'm sure a lot of black families too thought that the Kennedys were cool with us. What say you?
Oh God! All right, Dick Gregory and I appeared together on this show maybe around 2014, and I came on the show and I said, Dick Greg, I really get sick and tired of black folks with their KKK on the wall. And Greg goes, KKK, what do you mean? Kennedy, King, and Kennedy. And they even have it on fans. I mean, as a child, Mr. Nelson, I go to funerals and I see the 3Ks on these fans and funerals and all the black funerals. I'm like, what? John F. Kennedy Jr. was no fan of black people. John F. Kennedy Jr., when he was at Harvard University, he was a big supporter of Adolf Hitler. Now, I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. And my grandmother used to clean the houses for white folks south of Broad. We call them the SOBs. Hey, even Oprah Winfrey can't get a home south of Broad. Okay? If you ain't white, you ain't coming south of Broad. You check it out, see if I'm lying to you. I'll never lie to you. Well, anyway, one of the places that my grandmother used to clean houses while September Clark and other people were babysitting me on segregated Johns Island was the Fort Sumter Hotel. Now, the Fort Sumter Hotel today are very expensive condominiums down in Charleston, right there by the Battery, you know, where the white boys from the Citadel fired the shots on Fort Sumter, because the Second Amendment has nothing to do with a tyrannical government. The Second Amendment is about keeping the blacks and the slaves down from the Stonewall Rebellion, from the Denmark-Vesey Rebellion, from the Blackbeard pirates occupying Charleston, and one-third of Blackbeard's pirates were black runaway slaves. So while the NRA and these other folks continue to repeat this lie, the Second Amendment has nothing to do with a tyrannical government. The Second Amendment was Virginia and South Carolina and other slave states saying they needed to have a militia in case the slaves had a rebellion, an uprising, or run away. And I will never lie to you. So down there on the Battery at Fort Sumter, where the Fort Sumter Hotel used to be, that was one of the meeting places for John F. Kennedy while he was having his little love fest with one of Hitler's female spies. So I know all about John F. Kennedy, trust me. So Kennedy was no fan of black folks, okay? Kennedy was a politician. And when he was running for president in 1960, he was the first Catholic to run for president, because white Anglo-Saxon Protestants ran this country from the time it was formed. As we know, this is the 250th anniversary. In fact, the Episcopalians, and Daddy Bush was an Episcopalian, trust me, they ran this country for a long time. But in 1960, John F. Kennedy ran, and a lot of people in this country said, is John F. Kennedy loyal to the Pope, who's not a U.S. citizen, or is he loyal to the United States? And for John F. Kennedy to win, he needed the black vote. During that time period, most black folks were still registered Republicans because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican who freed the slaves. The Republican Party you know today is not the Republican Party from back in the Abraham Lincoln days. That flips began, unlike what people like Tom Hartman and others talking about the Southern strategy. The Southern strategy actually began with Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover was a Republican, but he wanted to get the Southern vote to get reelected. So he distanced himself from black Republicans and became basically more like Woodrow Wilson, Klan member, Southern lover. And FDR promised black folks and poor folks to give them jobs, to get us out of the depression from the stock market crash. And FDR ended up winning. But the Southern strategy began long before Nixon. He employed the Southern strategy. And, of course, Reagan employed the Southern strategy. And, of course, Trump employed the Southern strategy. But that began with Herbert Hoover. That's when black folks started saying, maybe the Republican Party ain't representing us. But a lot of black folks still remain Republicans, but back in those days, you could vote for either party. So they might have been registered Republicans, but they voted for FDR. Okay? 1960s, Kennedy needed black votes. Martin Luther King Jr., as I said earlier, was neither a Democratic nor Republican, and because Kennedy made campaign promises to the black civil rights leaders, most black folks voted for John F. Kennedy, and he got into the White House. Then, of course, Kennedy got assassinated. And I know we got the music coming up, so I'll finish this on the other side.
Right. Family, it's an interesting conversation we're having with Mark Mannerheim as we celebrate Dr. King's birthday. Family, reach out to us. You got a question, 800-450-7876. I'm going to take your calls next. And Grand Rising family, and happy King Day as we celebrate King Day 2025 with Mark from Anaheim. Before we go back to Mark, I just remind you to offer our condolences to the family and the friends of Dr. Charles Finch, MD. He was a medical doctor and also a chematologist. He's written several books about Nile Valley. He's written African origins of Christianity. He's also one of the few folks that I know that met Sheikh Anta Diop. He met him in Dakar, Senegal, and he talks about that meeting as well. He was a soldier, one of our power talkers as well. He made his transition. He was 77. Before we also got to say condolences to the family of Sonny Williams. Sonny Williams was a man about town in Los Angeles who worked for KGLH station, represented the state. Anywhere there was something that we're doing, he was there. Sonny made his transition yesterday morning. Sonny was 76. Anyway, family, let's go back to Mark from Anaheim. So, Mark, I'll let you finish telling us about the Kennedy brothers' affiliation with Dr. King.
Yes, listeners, first I apologize to you for this long-winded question, but this one question right here could be a whole semester of college, and I didn't know I was going to be a parent this morning, so it's not like I had prepared for this. When I mentioned the fact that Fort Sumter Hotel at the Citadel, at the Battery and all that, and I talk about the Citadel cadets firing on Fort Sumter, and the reason I was telling you that with the Second Amendment, I know a lot of listeners out there are listening from Virginia. Thank God for a new governor in Virginia, by the way. VMI is one of those militia schools, state militia schools that was formed in conjunction with things like the Second Amendment. And in Charleston, the Citadel is a state militia school. They're not the National Guard. They're the state militia. And practically every state in this country has a militia that's separate from the National Guard. You'll probably see a little bit more of that come out now with Trump's immigration policies and him forming more people in the immigration. John F. Kennedy, and I mentioned him with one of Hitler's female spies. During World War II, J. Edgar Hoover was already creating a file on Kennedy. And for you folks who think I'm making this up, you can write this down. She went by the name Inga, and her last name was Arvad, as V as in Victor. Inga Arvad. Now, I've been telling this story for years, but it was only maybe about 15 years ago that I guess there was a book that came out that confirmed what I've been trying to tell people for years about Kennedy and how he was literally in bed with a Nazi spy in Charleston, South Carolina. Well, Robert F. Kennedy became John F. Kennedy's Attorney General. And so when I was on the show with Greg and Mr. Nelson, I apologized to the listeners and said, I'm sorry to tell you that John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy are no fans of black folks. Robert F. Kennedy's godfather is none other than John Birch Society, Joseph McCarthy. In fact, Robert F. Kennedy tried to get his father to pull all kinds of strings. I should go back because you folks still think MAGA is about make America white again. MAGA is about the fact that Harry S. Truman fired Douglas MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur's right-hand man is one of the founding members of the John Birch Society.
Please stay healthy. We'll see you tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, right here in Baltimore.
Land. So unless it does, that's what to get an idea of some of the stuff that goes.
Expected bad weather, tornadoes may come.
Many of my mentors, between that,
if you're in Washington, the radio well. Coming up, but there was a Costa College professor, Manu Anthony, 1450 WOL. And of course, I got to tell you about the weather this afternoon. Anyway, take my advice. If you got something to do this afternoon, try to get it done earlier before 12 o'clock if you're in Washington, D.C. area or in Baltimore, and get it done in the morning. They'll get stuck in that weather. All right, let's go back to Mark. Mark, I asked you, okay.
I'm from Charleston, South Carolina.
Face.
The fact that Israel is showing disgust.
372. You can leave.
Being so gracious. 27 at the top. We supposedly have Dr. Taylor, but I think Dr. Taylor didn't.
Good morning to the listeners, sir.
So we got to get back up in. So let's go further down the state of California to Anaheim. Mark from Anaheim, Grand Rising. Welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us on such short notice.
Good morning, Mr. Nelson, and good morning to the listeners, sir.
Glad to have you. Thank you for waking up for us.
Well, I owe it to the memory of Dick Gregory, so it is what it is, bro. Glad to be. I'm glad I find myself in a position where you see me worthy of calling at 0 dark 30 in the morning.
All
And
right.
how are you, sir?
I'm still learning, Mark. I'm still learning.
Well, hopefully we all are, because I tell you, I learn something every single day. Well, not a thing. I learn lots every single day. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I have to say, this administration never ceases to disappoint me when it comes to, did that really happen? Did he really say that? So, yeah, it's been a learning curve.
Yes, it is. Because you told us a while back, years now, that what we're seeing today was going to happen. And you also said there's going to be a civil war and World War III. Are we still on that glide path to both of those events, or are we there yet?
Well, so when it comes to World War III, as you know, we've had the Russia-Ukraine war for a while now. And there are no less than 57 countries, the last time I checked, who have private contractors, in my day we used to call them mercenaries, who have private contractors fighting with Ukraine against Russia. So, I mean, I would imagine if you have 57 nations along with the two primary nations, 59 nations involved, because even though they may be private contractors, I don't see their countries penalizing them for participating in this conflict. So I would imagine we've been in World War for a while, sir.
All right. And the Civil War?
Well, I've told your listeners this before. There were two white police officers eating lunch in Las Vegas, just having their lunch, and Gerard Miller and his wife walked in. They were originally from Indiana, but they were protesting out there at the Clyde Bundy Ranch when a lot of these far right-wing folks were trying to drag President Barack Obama into a situation similar to the Ruby Ridge, where you have these, what we call white sovereign citizens who don't like the federal government. And fortunately, President Obama didn't fall for it. But these two individuals, they walked into this restaurant, shot and killed the two white cops having lunch, and then started drawing swastikas and saying the revolution has begun. And that's been, what, 10 years now? Well, not quite, 10 years now. So the Civil War started already, Mr. Nelson. I mean, a lot of these murders that are happening out there, they're not just by happenstance. They may not call it part of the Civil War, but you have these folks that are out there following the Turner Diaries and these other counter United States federal government books. And they treat it as the Bible. Even when Arby was killed, I grew up in segregated Johns Island, South Carolina. So as soon as I saw the Arby killing, back home we used to call that coon hunting. There's a lot of coon hunting going on, Mr. Nelson.
And speaking about that, you mentioned how this war started, but Netanyahu, let's focus on him for a second here. Didn't he try to do the same thing with Barack Obama, try to get Barack Obama into a war?
Benjamin Netanyahu has been trying to get the United States government into a war since he was in office, from the first day. For the folks out there, because you're going to hear these two names in mainstream media, but I strongly suggest I know you have some serious research warriors out there. The first name I'll provide for you is Irgun, I-R-G-U-N as in Nancy. And the second is Likud, L-I-K-U-D. Now, World War II, those organizations. You look at many of the leaders today in Zionist terrorist, and he was connected to something like, God, I want to say 93 people, Brits who were killed. And for you folks out there, for those who aren't familiar with me, don't believe anything I tell you. I want you to do your own research. But I will never come on this show and discuss something I don't know or haven't thoroughly researched. I will never lie to you. Queen Elizabeth never stepped foot in Zionist Israel. because between Laku and Urgun, they killed so many Brits. And, I heard one of your guests earlier discuss the fact that Israel has only been around for 70 years. And remember, Mr. Nelson, there was a brother who helped form the state of Israel as we know today. You do know who that brother was, right?
UCLA, I see his face right now.
Yeah, he's a brother, a black guy, OSS, United Nations. They have a school named after him over here in the Willowbrook, Compton area. And most people don't even know who I'm talking about, Ralph Bunche.
Ralph Bunche, yeah.
Yeah, Ralph Bunche. He was the instrumental in getting, as we know it today, the state of Israel, because that's not the Israel in the Bible. But, folks think that things that they see today is the way it's always been. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. When the British decided with their Balfour Declaration and their British mandate, Charleston, South Carolina initially was going to be the site for the new state of Israel. Then it moved to a proposed site in Kenya. Then it moved to a proposed site in Ghana. And then, the European powers to be decided, let's take this land over here where the Palestinians were residing. So, I always find it interesting when people talk about anti-Semitic because, believe it or not, the Palestinians are more Semitic than most of the people who are now calling themselves Jews in Israel. Most of the Jews in Israel come from Russia, Europe, and the United States. They're not Semitic. But, we've been gaslighted internationally, so if you criticize the current state of Israel, then all of a sudden now you're an anti-Semitic. But they don't ever apply that term Semitic to the Palestinians, the Christians, and other Jews, because, Mr. Nelson, most Jews are not Zionists. And in this country, most Zionists in this country are far right-wing Christian nationalist Zionists. They're not Jews. In fact, they want the destruction of Israel because they believe the few Jews that survive will convert to their form of Christianity. So when it comes to Netanyahu, he has been, you do know who his roommate was in college, correct?
No, who was it?
A certain Mormon that ran for president.
From Utah. Yeah, he's
Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
So, the Mormon church is very instrumental in a lot of stuff that's going on. I come on the show all the time and talk to you about the John Birch Society. Well, it was the Mormons who created the John Birch Society. So if you guys want an idea where this theology is coming from, do some research. Council for National Policy, Western Goals Foundation, and the John Birch Society. Donald Trump is John Birch Society. In fact, Donald Trump's mentor was Roy Cohn, the head attorney for the John Birch Society. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. His godfather was none other than Joseph McCarthy, John Birch Society. And you folks, if you don't know who you're dealing with, I don't know how you're going to ever win. So, yeah, we can blame Netanyahu, but Netanyahu was allowed to get into power just like Donald Trump was allowed to get in power. So we're reaping what we sowed, Mr. Nelson.
So what's the end game, Mark? What's the end game?
So you asked the kind of questions because you know I'm not going to lie to your listeners. So for you folks out there who don't know this, okay, Mr. Nelson and I, it used to be Mr. Nelson, Dick Gregory, the three of us. Those are the conversations that we could never put on the FCC, but those are the conversations you would love to hear, uncensored, unfiltered. So when Mr. Nelson asked me a question like, what's the end game? Armageddon, total annihilation, destruction. Haven't you even heard the term Armageddon being used now in context with this Iran war?
No, I haven't heard it. Is it being used?
You have not?
No,
all
is it
you
being
listeners
used?
out there, you just type in Iran war, Armageddon, and when the break is over, I'll come back and explain that one.
All right. 23 away from the top there, family. Mark from Anaheim is sitting in for us this morning as our guest. Do you want to reach him? 800-450-7876, and we'll take your calls next. And Grand Rising family, thanks for rolling with us on this Monday morning. Thanks for starting your week with us at 19 minutes away from the top of the hour. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. Mark is not his real name. He's not really from Anaheim, as you mentioned. You have these conversations with Dick Gregory and Steve Coakley. A lot of times, you guys on the East Coast, when you heard things that Coakley said or Dick Gregory said, they got it from Mark from Anaheim. But there was only two people who were brave enough to inform me what was going on. But that's that, and everything. And I'll say this too: everything that Mark has told us has come true. And those are people from who listened to us back in the day will know that as well. Coming up later this week, you're going to hear from Contra Costa College professor Manu Ampin. Also, medical and holistic doctor Dr. A will be with us. Entertainer in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. The weather's going to go real south and real fast this afternoon. In fact, schools are going to be let out early because of this expected. All right, let's go back to Mark. Mark, I asked you what's the end game, and you talked about Armageddon. So I'll let you finish that.
Yeah, well, in between that, you mentioned something else, so I should, because I know a lot of listeners out there probably don't know who I am or my background. So, many of my mentors were World War II Nazis brought to the United States, along with World War II OSS, Office of Strategic Services, old boys, and Office of Naval Intelligence, old boys. Now, why I was selected, I have no idea. But my mother, shortly before she died, finally revealed to me that when I was only 2 years old, I was being used for psychic experiments by certain whatever government agencies in New York at the age of 2, Mr. Nelson. And I guess there must be some validity to that because when I was only 5 years old, now living on segregated Johns Island, South Carolina, I was already talking about test tube babies. The U.S. wasn't talking about test tube babies until the 1970s. So I'll never lie to you folks. I am probably one of those experiments, or I should say the product of one of those experiments, when you brought all these Nazi scientists and doctors over here into major cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. Never knew who my father was. When I was born, I could pass for white. So who knows? I don't dwell on it. I did find the television show X-Files interesting because I'm like, wow, yeah. And Mr. Nelson will attest to the fact that, yeah. For some reason, these folks think I'm the gifted one or a psychic. And so I have no affiliation with any political organization or political party. I dropped out of all of that back in the early 90s. However, I will say as a Marine Corps field grade officer, I was often enticed or seduced into joining various organizations within our Department of Defense that most people don't know about. And because of my upbringing, I never went along with it. And for you folks out there who may not have a clue to what I'm talking about, this is a name I strongly suggest anybody research to get an idea of some of the stuff that goes on in our armed forces that you have no idea. And his name is Michael Aquino. Aquin as in Nancy O. Michael Aquino was one of those folks out there trying to recruit me because they thought I was some, I don't know, psychic gifted. Now, at the end of World War II, Mr. Nelson, I am coming back to your end game. At the end of World War II, the Soviet Union took most of the so-called psychic warriors from Nazi Germany, while the United States took most of the Nazi scientists who were responsible for our jet propulsion laboratory, NASA, our weapon systems. But over the years, there have been some folks in the United States who've decided, maybe the Soviet Union has something going there with their psychic warriors. So there's a Hollywood, as I call it, Hollywood Babylon. There's a film out there called Men Who Stare at Goats with George Clooney. Very interesting perspective on the war in Iraq, but it also talks about the psychic warriors. And even though they don't mention them by name in that film, the guy who's into martial arts, his name was Michael Ichanis. And I was one of the students back in the day who studied with Michael Ichanis' style of martial arts, Hwang Do. Hwangdo is like the Korean version of the ninjas. And Michael Ichanis studied under Juban Lee, who was the Grand Master for the Federation of Hwangdo. His son now, Henry, is the Grand Master for the Federation. But they came over to the United States and taught lots of folks special forces, Navy SEALs, recon. Very interesting folks. But Michael Aquino, Mr. Nelson, he was in alliance with Anton LaVey. So you have the Church of Satan. And Michael Aquino had a security clearance as much higher than I ever had. Trust me. So you folks, you study him. Now, Mr. Nelson is sitting back and not saying anything. Because see, he and I have had these conversations before. We've gone down this rabbit hole. But this is the first time I'm sharing this with your listeners. So if you want an idea of some of the stuff that goes on within inside our armed forces, just research Satanic Worshiping Air Force Academy, Satanic Worshiping West Point. Research, because see, the internet has a lot of information out there. Research sex torture Air Force Academy, sex torture Annapolis, so in the DMV, sex torture West Point, because they're out there. You know, these are the people leading your country, Mr. Nelson. Hey, these are the people who get selected to get the flag ranks, you know, admiral and generals. So I'm just telling you, folks. You think I don't know what I'm talking about? The Nazis did not lose World War II. Germany lost World War II. The Nazis fled throughout Europe, United States, South America, and even Israel. Otto Skorzeny, who was one of Hitler's top henchmen, after he went over to Egypt and taught them intelligence, he went to work with Mossad, Mr. Nelson. Otto, O-T-T-O, Skorzeny, S-K-O-R-Z-E-N-Y. I will never lie to you, folks. And I've been warning your listeners, Mr. Nelson, since the early 1990s that the Fourth Reich is here. Now, I came on your show, Mr. Nelson, in the early 90s because when I saw the Lindbergh, Charles Lindbergh was a Nazi lover. In fact, Charles Lindbergh was in Germany, helping Germany build their air force prior to the attack on Poland. Lindbergh came to the United States and told the U.S., you better get ready because you got nothing that can beat the Nazis' air force. Lindbergh came from Germany back to the U.S., and he was a Nazi. Same thing with Heinrich Ford that you folks call Henry Ford from Ford Motor Company. Heinrich Ford got the medal from Hitler, the only guy who got the Golden Eagle from Hitler here in the United States. That's who runs this country, Mr. Nelson. I don't know what world you other folks have been living in. These folks are ruling. So when I saw the Lindbergh Beacon, which most people in this era would call the spotlight at top of City Hall in L.A., when I saw that light come on for the first time in more than decades, I came on your show and told your listeners, the Fourth Reich is here. They're back, Mr. Nelson, and they're ruling. And you guys sat back worried about, you know, Mike Tyson and ESPN and getting drunk and getting high and partying and thinking, oh, you've arrived because Bill Clinton's in the White House, so let's move to Atlanta. Well, guess what? Now they're revealing themselves. And they have gone into worldwide authoritarian. This stuff that's happening in the U.S. we're one of the last countries to come online. The rest of the world's already there, Mr. Nelson. That's who these folks are. So, you know, the Zionists have always been in bed with South Africa. Most of the weapons that went to South Africa during apartheid came from Israel. The rest came from the United States and other European countries. So, you know, it's easy for us to blame Netanyahu. Netanyahu is just a product. His upbringing, you know, in that group. So when it comes to what the end game is, the end game is one, full spectrum domination, and two, Armageddon. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Unfortunately, it does.
Challenge you to come back on this radio and tell Mr. Nelson and the listeners anything I just said to you was a lie, misinformation, or disinformation. I don't talk
That's
about
good.
stuff I don't already know. They
Uh,
train me. Of course I would know. I was a member of many of those organizations, except for the ones that were Luciferian and satanic. And when I saw what their agenda was, I dropped out and started appearing on the radio with Mr. Nelson telling you folks what the plan was. They laugh because they say, yeah, go ahead and tell them. They ain't going to listen to you. And what are they going to do about it anyway? So when Donald Trump was announced the winner back in November, I came on this show and I told your listeners, I guess they have won because I've been fighting them for more than 30 years. Guys like, you had that movie Apocalypse Now, and some of that movie that Marlon Brando portrayed that character as loosely based on a Colonel Hackworth, David Hackworth. I believe he was the most decorated Army officer in Vietnam. And Hackworth, when he saw what was happening to the United States, he fled to Australia and started raising sheep. But then the John Birch Society emerged after John Birch Society, Reagan's administration was over, and Daddy Bush was in the White House, who wasn't John Birch, by the way. There's no love lost between the Reagan and Bush family. But then in the early 90s, Mr. Nelson, that's when you had your boy, Newt Gingrich, John Birch Society, come out and tell you we're taking back our country. You do remember those days, right, Mr. Nelson?
oh yeah, I do remember those.
Oh, of course, because that's what the United States was before FDR became president. Every single thing that Hitler did in Nazi Germany, Mr. Nelson, where did he get the idea from?
From here.
The United States. Even the so-called Nazi salute, everybody's jumping all over Elon Musk because he did the Nazi salute. It's not the Nazi salute. Look it up for yourself. It's the Bellamy salute. Bellamy. That is how children saluted in this country to the U.S. flag prior to FDR becoming president. On both sides of the U.S. flag, you have the symbol of the fascists. So I don't know what country you folks have been pretending you've been living in. All Donald Trump is doing is taking the United States back to the way the United States was before FDR gave you your, he came in with the New Deal, and then Johnson intensified it with the Great Society. The experiment is up. Multiculturalism is over. These folks are taking back the country that they stole from native indigenous people, but they claim it's theirs. They're the colonizers. That's what they're doing. So if you don't even know who your enemy is, I don't know how you're going to fight and defeat them. I just call it the way. Hey, it is what it is. I said what I said.
Yeah, and we come up on a break. When we come back, though, many of the audience, Mark, they feel like it's issues. It's not about black or you being black or so-called minority. They're afraid that minorities are going to take over the country and all and that stuff. It's about money. It's about where are you on the economic scale. I'm let you explain that, and also what does it mean for the rich black folks? Are they going to escape whatever's coming while they're making these moves? So I'll let you do that when we get back. We got to take a short break. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. Called him late and he responded. And you want to get in on this conversation with him, just reach out to us at 800-450-7876. Before I take calls, before we left for the break, Mark, I was telling because you mention this all the time, and our listeners, because you hear them all the time saying it's a black and white thing there, because we're gonna outnumber them and they're afraid of us and all of that stuff. But you say it's not a racial, it's a class issue that's going down. Can you explain that for the family?
All right, Mr. I try not to laugh, but oh my God. All right, so before we get into is it a black thing, let's go back to the Armageddon. So, Mr. Nelson, there's an organization out there. It's a nonprofit organization for any of your listeners out there, because I know you have some serious researchers. The name of the organization is called Military Religious Freedom Foundation. Military Religious Freedom Foundation. They have been receiving hundreds of calls, most of them anonymous, of course, because these folks are serving in uniform, complaining about commanding officers telling them that God appointed Donald Trump to lead them in the war towards Armageddon. Now, what's interesting is, a lot of people like to rely on Snopes, and I get to tell you, I've been on a few times looking up stuff on Snopes, and Snopes is accurate when they want to be. I'll just put it that way. Some of their stuff is not very accurate, but Snopes refuses to say yes and no on it because the callers are anonymous. So they claim, well, we're not going to verify it because it's anonymous sources. The Department of War has not responded to any of the queries regarding that. Now, folks can jump all over Donald Trump and the Trump administration. Mr. Nelson, this has been going on in the armed forces for a long time. I've been sending articles to people since the early 90s how there are certain individuals within the armed forces who are far-right evangelical and have been trying to get certain units to follow their footsteps. And they're always harder when it comes to, because, we have what's called court-martials, but we also have called non-judicial punishment. And you have these, the best example, because Carl Reiner was recently murdered. Carl Reiner, who did the movie A Few Good Men. There are two great things about that film that I cite to a lot of people. One, you had a black colonel who was the judge. And when Jack Nicholson disrespects him in the courtroom, he goes, "You will address this courtroom as your honor or judge, because I'm sure I've earned it." I can't begin to tell you how many times I had to say that to white cops at LAPD and white folks in the Marine Corps, because I didn't tolerate insubordination. They look at you with that rank, but they still look at you as being black, and they don't recognize it. They don't recognize it only if you allow them to get away with it. And I didn't let people get away with misogyny or bigotry. But the other one, Mr. Nelson, you have Kiefer Sutherland. He's on the witness stand. And he goes, "There are only two books I go by, and if it's not in these two books, I don't follow it. It's the Marine Corps Manual and the King James Bible." You look at that character in A Few Good Men, Mr. Nelson. Trust me, there are a lot of folks out there like that. And those are the people now who are telling their soldiers and Marines and their sailors and their airmen, God put Donald Trump here. Now, this is nothing new. Long before the Iran war, Mr. Nelson, I told you how they consider Donald Trump, King Cyrus of Persia. I heard a listener this morning mentioning how Iraq was old Persia. Isn't Iran Persia? Aren't the people in Iran Persian, Mr. Nelson? Yes, no. So, that's the world we're living in. We're living in this world where you have these far right wing, I can't say on the radio how I would describe them, but they're crazy. And they believe in destroy the planet because we're going to heaven. We're not of this world. In fact, they have a new film studio that's been putting a lot of propaganda films out lately. Things about child sex trafficking and stuff. And then when you do the research, these folks up there in Salt Lake City with the Mormons that have this new television studio network putting out they're well done propaganda films. In fact, even one of the females from Romy's, I guess, high school reunion or whatever, she's part of that clique. But if you really go back and study the history of the films that they're depicting, the very people that they're propagating as heroes in fighting sex trafficking are themselves under investigation for sex trafficking. But of course, since those people are Mormons also, the district attorneys in Utah decide there's not enough evidence to prosecute, but some of them have been excommunicated by the Mormon Church or the Church of Latter-day Saints. I wish I was lying to you, but I'll never lie to you. So when it comes to, is it a black thing? Is there bigotry involved? Yes. Is misogyny involved? Yes. It's not a black thing. Now, Mr. Nelson, you made the comment they're worried about black and brown people taking over the population. Anybody who says that, do you ever take the time to just do one simple internet search? What percentage of the U.S. population is white? That's all you have to do to know. It's a waste of time and a waste of your breath to even say that. So I'm going to type that in right now. What percentage of U.S. population is white? Well, let's see here, because I already know the answer. But I want to see what it says as of 4 days ago. U.S. population. Percentage of population in the United States. 65% of the U.S. population is white. So how the hell can black and brown folks be replacing white people? Stop repeating that garbage. That's why they're going after black people. Now, there are some ignorant folks out there who are melanin challenged who have fallen for that propaganda, and they repeated the replacement theory, but it's not true. 65% of the U.S. population, as I'm speaking to you right now, is white. Here in California, white candidates don't even campaign in black neighborhoods. You folks are always repeating this lie. The black vote is the most significant vote that the Democratic Party needs. Shut up with this garbage. Do some research instead of repeating garbage you hear all the time because it sounds good. They couldn't care less about your vote. Seriously. Now, there's some certain areas in urban environments, well, yeah, if there's a large group of black people in a certain district, yeah, they may have an impact. Now, in this country, the majority of people who are eligible to vote stop voting because they haven't been given a choice. As Dick Gregory says, vote for the lesser of two evils. That's how Hitler got to power. And a lot of people just don't vote anymore. So out of the people who do vote, you think the blacks are the ones that are making the difference? And I challenge you to come on this radio and provide some facts to say that I'm lying to you or providing misinformation or disinformation. Seriously. We have to stop living and repeating the lies. It ain't a black thing. These folks could not care less about you any more than they care about folks who look as they do. All they care about is power, wealth, and land. So unless you're in a position to provide them with power, wealth, and land, you are inconsequential to them. When I was a member of many of these organizations, I was in the room with Muslims, with Jews, with Christians, with atheists. They couldn't care less about whether you're a Democratic or a Republican. They don't care. All they want to know is how can you help me get more money, more power, and more land. So I hope that answers the question, Mr. Nelson. Are we still on the air?
All right, Mark, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, yeah, we had some changes going on here. 800-450-7876. Got some folks want to talk to you. Bob.
I bet they do.
Grand Rising, Bob, your question for Mark from Anaheim. Is Bob there on line two? I'm not hearing Bob, Kevin.
Hello, 1, 2, 3. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Hello. Great. Blessed love, family, and thank you, brother, for the information. I like the way you explain the Semitic thing, because most people just basically puppet. So when they hear anti-Semitic, they think anti-Israel. People may be familiar with the Yom Kippur War. Some people are calling this right now what we're witnessing, the Ramadan War. And I was wondering, in terms of Israel, people, you talk about evangelicals. There's black evangelicals and there's white evangelicals. So in terms of the black-white thing, I think there's different perspectives from what they see and what they hope for. It's people see Israel, they see modern day Israel, and they think that's the same thing as biblical Israel. I was wondering whether you can explain whether they are the same thing or not. And when people think about Palestine, as Israel likes to call it, Greater Israel, can they explain what we've seen in terms of the destruction in Gaza and the West Bank and the oppression of the Palestinian people? And my last question is does he have any opinion about the film Sinners and its presence or what it was trying to say?
Okay, so let's start with the black evangelicals. So, Mr. Nelson, you know me. I just call a spade, no pun intended, because I'm not referring to blacks as being spades. You know, I come on the show and say the word spook, and everybody thinks I'm putting down black folks when spooks to me means spy. I'm just telling you, a lot of these black folks who come out publicly and tell you how much they're down with the black folks, when they get in that voting booth, they're going to vote for Donald Trump. Why? Because Donald Trump promised to appoint judges to the Supreme Court who would get rid of abortion. So you have a lot of these people in the Church of God in Christ who are just as far right as the white evangelicals. And I know, I think a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Nelson, you had somebody on your show who brought up the whole thing when there was a black minister, Fred Price, I believe. And in fact, wasn't Fred Price's son dating a white female whose father was a big-time white evangelical? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And how did the white evangelical respond to that?
It's not very nice. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. So these black folks put themselves out there with these white evangelicals. Let me just make this clear, okay? Even Gandhi said something like, I love Jesus Christ. Most Christians, not so much, because people love to use the term Christian, and they're not Christians. Most evangelicals, they only ascribe to the Old Testament. Now, when it comes to the Mormons, it doesn't matter, because the Mormons, I'm just going to tell you, do your own research. The Mormons do not believe that the blood of Jesus Christ can get you into heaven. In fact, the hardcore Mormons believe if you're not a Mormon, the only way you can get into their version of heaven is for them to kill you. I said what I said. It is what it is. Trust me. I know. And there are a lot of Mormons here in Southern California. So, in fact, you know, they control all the gambling license in Nevada, for you folks who don't know that. So anyway, I'm just telling you, when it comes to evangelicals, don't waste your time trying to convince them, because they're like a cult. They believe what they believe, and there ain't a darn thing you can say or do that's going to convince them otherwise. And I don't like to use the term hell-bent in this case, but no pun intended. And they're hell-bent on leading to this destruction of the planet. So the brother asked about modern-day Israel.
I should have said Christians. You go ahead. I don't want to let you, but I should have said Christians.
Black what do you mean when you
as opposed to black?
Well, that's a valid point though, because see, I don't list evangelicals with Christians. That's what I'm trying to tell you, because they go by the Old Testament. They're not following the New Testament. Now, there are some exceptions to the rule, but if you listen to the rhetoric of the evangelicals, all they care about is the Old Testament. And then worse, these major white mega church evangelicals, they started doing things like the 7 Mountain Mandate. There's nothing in the Bible about the 7 Mountain Mandate. Now, brother, you know, I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but I'm assuming that you've done some research into religion.
A little bit, yes, sir.
Is Armageddon even mentioned in the Bible?
I'm not a Bible scholar, sir, but I'll listen to you. I'm
just saying, a lot of this stuff these people out here repeat every day, even the rapture, is the word rapture mentioned in the Bible? You know, a lot of the stuff these people say, like this is my favorite one. Hell have no fury like the wrath of a woman scorned. That's not in the Bible. These are white folks who have a dream at night, come back to church the next day, preach it to their gospel, and then they just spread it and spread it and spread it. You know, repeat the lie long enough, it becomes the truth. Trust me, I was teaching Sunday school at the age of 9 on Johns Island, South Carolina, at Zion Presbyterian Church because they thought I was some child prodigy. Within a year, they wanted to run me out of the church because I was pointing out all the hypocrisies that the church was doing in what I was reading in the Bible. Shut him up. He's a child. He shouldn't be talking. He should be seen anyway. Only seen, not heard. Back in those days, we used to.
I know that's all right there, Mark. We got to step aside for a few moments. Bob, I thank you for your call. Family, you too want to get in on this conversation, reach out to us at 800-450-7876. We'll take your phone calls next. And Grand Rising family, thanks for starting your week with us. 20 minutes after the top of the hour with Mark from Anaheim coming in late for us, but he's giving us some information. So, Bob, I thank you for your call from Buffalo. So, Mark, I'll let you finish responding to Mark's call.
Mr. Nelson, now I've read the Bible. In fact, it was interesting because when I was married to a Catholic. And she said to me, "You're the first person I've ever met who's ever actually read the Bible." Because the Catholics, the Pope tells them what to believe every Sunday. There are some exceptions to the rule, but most I've never met a Catholic who's actually read the Bible. I'm just telling you, okay? And it just amazes me because many people fled Europe to get away from religious persecution. This country was founded by criminals and people who wanted to practice their form of religion over in this country. Now, this country was colonized by white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And I know you had a caller who called in and corrected me because there happened to be one guy before John F. Kennedy, but before John F. Kennedy, there was never a viable candidate for president. Now, Joe Biden was a Catholic, but nobody ever mentioned that. Go back and do a family tree and see what his family was involved in back in the day. So I'm just saying to you, it just amazes me how people use religion for their own political agenda and for wealth. That's why I strongly suggest you watch the TV series Handmaid's Tale, because the TV series Handmaid's Tale doesn't even bring it up until the very last season that they were actually talking about the Mormon Church. Up until that time, they never mentioned it. But they finally come out in the final season and say it's the Mormon Church. So you have these evangelicals who've aligned themselves ever since Billy Graham said that Mormons are Christians. Billy Graham, like he wasn't a bigot, please. Oh, but he was an evangelical. Mr. Nelson, I have a question for you because, you and I have been around for a while. Why is it every time the United States went to war, who did they bring to the White House to pray with the president?
Billy Graham.
And you folks don't even ask why. Please go back and do some research on who Billy Graham was. In fact, Haldeman, who was one of Nixon's right-hand men. Oh, I used to have a crush on Mo back in the Watergate days. That was Haldeman's wife. Anyway, Haldeman did a book, and in his book, he does some interesting revelations to who Billy Graham was. Haldeman, by the way, is the one who also talked about Nixon's war on drugs was a war on blacks. And I'm not going to tell you that's not true. It didn't start with Nixon. The war on drugs, which was a war on blacks, Mr. Nelson, any idea when that really started?
When?
Because the brother mentioned the film Sinners. What's the predominant music played in Sinners?
I don't recall. I know, but I don't. What is it?
The blues. And what does the film even tell you the blues is called? The devil's music. The whole film is about black folks willingly giving their souls up following some white fallen angel. Don't you folks even understand? You have native indigenous people who show up in the film for a whopping like 45 seconds. But prior to you seeing them come on the screen, you see this white guy who just falls out of the sky. Wake up, folks. He's a fallen angel. And to go into the white family's home, he had to get permission. And the native indigenous people, don't let him in your house. He's not who you think he is. But they willingly invited him in. When you look at all the people in the film who get turned, they can't get back in the juke joint unless they're invited in. You folks, you can say all you want about Lucifer, but Lucifer doesn't make you do a damn thing. Lucifer gives you free will. You make a deal, and then later on you don't want to pay up. when you reap the benefits of the deal you made with Lucifer. Now, I know there are a lot of atheists out there. I couldn't care less. Trust me, folks. I have seen and done things where I know there is a God. In fact, Mr. Nelson's heard this story before. There were these three beautiful black girls transplanted back from New York to South Carolina, and they didn't give me the time of day. So I'm walking by, because they live down the street from us. I'm walking by one day, and I'm trying to impress them. And I said something that was blasphemous, knowing better, but because I knew they were atheists, I was trying to impress them. I will never lie to you. There was not a cloud in the sky, 80 degrees, over in this subdivision of Charleston called West Oak. Well, no, I'm sorry, it was Ponderosa is where we lived. Within milliseconds after that blasphemy came out of my mouth, lightning struck in that yard between those girls and me. Those three girls got up, went in the house, and for the rest of the time we were at St. Andrews High School, they never spoke to me again. And I just looked up in the heavens and said to God, yes, God, I knew better. So you folks can believe whatever you want. I don't have to believe in anything because I've been there. I've died twice. And your life is never the same after you've had a near-death experience. So all I'm saying to you, Mr. Nelson, there is so much out there that people want to believe is just Hollywood. It ain't Hollywood, okay? And so when it comes to what's going on with the churches, the Wahhabis have corrupted the Muslim faith, and most of what the Wahhabis speak is not found in the Quran. The Zionists, most of the Zionists don't even go to synagogue. They're atheists themselves. Seriously. Zionists, they're not practicing Jews, they're secular Jews. But they have corrupted and say things that's not in the Torah. And when it comes to the far right-wing evangelicals in this country, much of what they're preaching you can't not find in the Bible. They've taken over Christianity. So once again, I recommend to the listeners who haven't heard me before, find the television show Dig, D-I-G, because they show all the stuff leading up to what's happening right now in Iran. Also go back and watch the TV series Homeland. Here's one for you, Mr. Nelson. In the TV show Homeland, Marine, he's taken prisoner of war. He's turned into a jihadist terrorist and returned back to the United States. What converted him? What was the straw? Something like 63 children at a school were killed by a U.S. bomb, and the U.S. refused to take responsibility for it. So they blamed it on propaganda and terrorists when it was actually a U.S. bomb that inadvertently killed all these innocent children at a school. What do we have going on right now? Everybody's debating whether it was a U.S. bomb that killed all these innocent children in Iran. That's going to be blowback, major blowback on both the United States and Israel, because nobody wants to take responsibility for their actions. So I'm just saying it's amazing how Hollywood Babylon always tells you what's coming down. Because Dig came out before Donald Trump even announced he was running for president. And in the film Dig, because Mr. Nelson brought up something to me on the phone about heifer, I am not referring to women when I say heifer. Do some research, folks. The red heifer that was shown in Dig, 2 red heifers were illegally secreted out of Texas into Israel, and Palestinians who knew about it, I'm not justifying what they did. I'm just saying some of them responded in October of 2023, and you've been having major bloodshed in Gaza since 2023 because Bob, who called in earlier, asked about Gaza. For you folks who don't even know, 1967, you had the Egyptian war with Israel. And I'm so glad that Helen Mirren starred in this film called Golda. Because Golda Meir, you talk about a far-right Zionist. Golda Meir was prime minister, and Helen Mirren does an excellent job of portraying her in that film. But the one line that I really loved in that film, because I don't use terms like Middle East, that's Africa. just building some Suez Canal and breaking off pieces of it, and Europeans calling it different names. Like Pakistan is India, Kuwait is Iraq. Europe, especially England, they come in and they find resources in a certain area, so they just, all right, we're going to rename this part, and then we're going to, take the resources from this area. Okay. There's no South and North Korea. It's Korea. There's never no North and South Vietnam. It's Vietnam. So in that film, when Israel apparently drives Egypt, driving them back into Africa, that's a line in the film. And I'm like, praise God. How many times I've come on the show with Mr. Nelson and tell folks that Egypt is Africa. In that 1967 war, the USS Liberty was shot up by Israel because that was an intelligence ship, and Israel did not want the U.S. to know what they were doing with some of the captives from Egypt. To this day, Israel has never really apologized for what happened with the USS Liberty. Killed a whole lot of Navy personnel, wounded a whole lot more. That's when Gaza was taken from Egypt. That region that we're calling Gaza now, that was Egypt until 1967. See, folks never study history. This stuff was not always the way it was. And so to answer Bob's question earlier, no, the current state of Israel is not the Israel in the Bible. Orthodox Jews do not recognize the current state of Israel. And in recent years, with Netanyahu in office, he now is ordering Orthodox Jews to submit to conscription in the IDF, Israeli Defense Force, because up until recent years, Orthodox Jews were exempt. They didn't serve because they don't recognize the current state of Israel. That's a man-made created Israel, and they believe that only God can return Israel. But now a lot of Orthodox Jews are fleeing Israel because they don't have any desire to serve in the IDF. So, I mean, Mr. Nelson, if you want to get in an argument, just talk about, politics, sex, and religion, right? So I know this is a heavy topic, but do your own research, folks. Don't believe anything I tell you. There's only one mention in the Bible of Armageddon. That's in Revelations. But people act like that's all they want to talk about is Armageddon, Armageddon, Armageddon. So, yes, the Iran war is now being coined as the war that's leading to Armageddon. So for you folks who didn't hear me earlier, I say again, find Military Religious Freedom Foundation, because they're the ones who've been doing a lot of complaining about this, but they're being shut down by mainstream media when folks call them up saying they're being told by their commanding officers that this Iran war is leading to Armageddon, and Donald Trump was given divine powers by God.
Okay, hold that right there. 27 away from the top there. By the way, one of our listeners said the show Dig is on Roku. If you got the Roku app, you can check that out.
Get it before they shut it down.
Right. We got a bunch of folks want to talk to you, Mark.
No, because the evangelicals are buying up all the networks. Who do you think's behind Paramount? All these networks that are being bought up, go back and find out who these folks are. See, they love to use the term the liberal media. There's no liberal media in this country. Right here in Los Angeles, New York is the biggest media outlet in the United States. Los Angeles is the second. Now, until Tavis Smiley brought out his little AM radio station that's so far on the dial, most people can't even get it. You name me one radio station in all of L.A. County that talks politics that is a left-leaning liberal media. There is none. KPFK is Pacifica, but they don't just do politics. They do music and all kinds of other stuff. Find me a radio station that discusses politics that's not far right-wing in the L.A. area before Tavis Smiley's KBLA. And you folks repeat this crap about liberal media. They're not liberal. Hell, even on Sunday mornings for a long time before CBS sold all the radio stations, every Sunday morning, who did I hear at 6 o'clock, Mr. Nelson, on the CBS News channel? The Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And you folks don't even ask why. Please, let's take some calls.
26 away from the top. Yeah, Derek's in Colorado. He's on line 3. Grand Rising, Derek. Your question for Mark from Anaheim.
Yeah, Mark. I saw a program here. They have something called DW. It's a German channel, but they do everything in English. They had something about German colonialism, and they had a QR code. And I looked it up, and they were talking about they were talking about the Germans when they went into Namibia. They killed about 85,000 Herero. I think it's a tribe. I'm probably not saying it correctly. And they said from there, then that after the World War I, and then they were, they killed about 85,000. And then they were listing all the things the Germans did. And they said from there, and then when Hitler came into power, the same thing that they had done in Namibia, they did then they did to the Jews and Europe, and they said that's where they got a lot of their ideas. They got a lot of their ideas as far as them with the Jews, but they also got a lot of their ideas from what they.
And Derek, do us a favor because we're coming up on a break. Can you put in a question for him?
Mr. Nelson, I have the question. So,
okay.
Hey, I don't talk about stuff I don't know when it comes to Nazis in Germany, trust me. So, what many people don't seem to understand in this country, prior to World War I, Germany was one of the biggest colonial powers. They lost most of their colonies. That was taken away from them after World War I, and those colonies went to France, England, and United States. So a lot of folks don't know that. We are back to prior World War I, Mr. Nelson. Remember when I started coming back on your show with you in 2012, I sent you maps, from the boys at the pickle factory. For you folks who don't know where the pickle factory is, it's in Langley, but I'm old school. So anyway, I showed maps of the Ottoman Empire, and then I showed maps of what Europe looks like since the Soviet Union collapsed, and they're returning back to the way it was. You got to study World War I. I'll finish this at the end of the break.
All right, family, 24 away from the top of the hour. Thank you, Derek. Thanks for your call. 800-450-7876, number to call. Speaks with Mark from Anaheim. Please put in a question for him so he can respond because we've got a bunch of folks got questions. We'll take your phone calls next. And Grand Rising family, thanks for staying with us on this Monday morning with our guest, Mark from Anaheim. Mark pinch hitting for our guest who was scheduled guest out to be Dr. James Taylor. So, Mark, I'm going to let you finish the response to Derek out of Colorado's question. We got some more folks who want to talk to you as well.
For the listeners out there, I suggest you study German colonial empire. Prior to World War I, the British were number one. The sun never sets on the British Empire. Number two was France. The third largest colonizer was Germany. At the end of World War I, which is nothing but a war between relatives. They have you do the fighting, but all world leaders are related by blood, okay? If you can find a documentary, there's a great documentary called Cousins at War. And it shows you all these families who just don't know how to get along with each other and use you to go out and do their fighting. Mr. Nelson, what country is Donald Trump's family from?
I think his mother's Scottish.
I'll make this simple because I know we're running out of time. Germany has the largest population of people in this country. 15% of the U.S. population is German, and you folks still don't get it. And they're running things. I'm just telling you. The largest demographic group in this country, ancestry, is German. And Trump's family is German. In fact, his name was not Trump, it was Frump. That's their original name. And God forbid if you got Germans who call themselves Germans today, but who are actually from Prussia. Because even in World War I, Germans didn't even like the Prussians because of the cutthroat things they were doing during battles. But I know, Mr. Nelson, we have some other callers. So.
Yes, we do. All right, let's go. 16 away from the top there. B's in Atlanta on line 4. Grand Rising B, your question for Mark.
Rising Baba call on Grand Rising Baba Mark. Bless all the ancestors that surround you. Baba Mark, I just want to confirm what you spoke about earlier. In September of 2022, 5 red heifers were delivered to Israel. So that confirmed as you speak profoundly, because I hear, to me, you're like a Mandinka warrior, giving your Gullah Geechee roots, always trying to give us insight. So one question is,
I got that from Gullah Jack.
So one question is, what mostly disappointed you about our people when you were coming to give us the news, like our great grandma having premonitions? And two, can you explain the importance of kindness and the cooperation? Because even when we see on the other side, they cooperate. Many times people talk about the bug out bag, but they always forget that one element of bug out bag of cooperation and kindness. And can you speak to that? And have an outstanding, wonderful day. Thank you.
You too, bro. So here's the thing. Most disappointing, okay? I can just start with my own home. I might be Mark from Anaheim to you folks on the radio, but to my offspring, I'm just their father. They don't listen to anything I tell them. In fact, I have to retract that. My son now, because I'm a grandfather, and my son now has a son, he's starting to call me now, and before he didn't want to have anything to do with me, but now he's starting to realize I wasn't so crazy when I was trying to explain to them what was going on. So, I don't want to say he's the prodigal son because we got a long way to go, but it's amazing how he comes to me now for information instead of going to the internet. I'll just give you one good example about what the brother's saying. My biggest disappointment, even this morning, I say, do your own research. Young folks are getting all their information from their friends and the internet. And a lot of older folks are too. When I tell people stuff, they're not going to a website when I say do it in the internet research. What they're doing is getting the chat GPT response. Now, you folks, there was a film out there about LAPD with Al Pacino called Heat. And in that film, there was a black female who was very short, but she was a prostitute that was killed by this Nazi who was a bank robber, an armored car robber. So I said to GPT, who played the prostitute? You know what ChatGPT told me? Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman was Al Pacino's daughter in the film. So you folks keep getting your information from ChatGPT. This is how you're being misled. You got to go back and talk to your elders. My biggest disappointment, Mr. Nelson, is I have black folks right here in Southern California who know what I've gone through, and they have never brought me to their schools, had never had their children bring me to their schools to tell them what was really happening because they rather have some white person teach them in class about black history. So I guess to answer the brother's question, as far as kindness goes, I've always ascribed to agape love. I knew I wouldn't be where I am today if it hadn't been for kindness. While a lot of people out there today believe that kindness is a sign of weakness, I know otherwise. And I'm going to make this short because I know you have other callers, Mr. Nelson. There was a white girl who I saw walking through Watts one day, short pants on, T-shirt, and I'm like, okay, what's wrong with this photograph? Did I racially profile when I was a cop? You're damn right I did. Any good cop racially profiles. So I asked this white girl, what are you doing here? Oh, I'm going to Venice Beach. She was nowhere near Venice Beach, and I know she was just, as we call a report, getting ready to happen in the crime. So get in the car. Did I have the right to put her in the car? Probably not. So I bring her back to the station, Mr. Nelson. It turns out she was a runaway from Ohio. My last money for the month, I put her on a bus back to her family, who was so grateful to me. Mr. Nelson, that same day, a couple hours later, I get a call from a woman who I never knew telling me my two offspring were at her house because they had been chased down the street by somebody armed with a knife. And she took my children in for shelter. So I left LAPD, went and picked my children up. Karma, folks, yeah, it comes back. So I hope that answers the brother's question.
All right, 12 away from the top. Yeah, let's go to line 2. Sister Leona's checking in from Michigan. Grand Rising, Sister Leona, your question for Mark from Anaheim.
Grand Rising, Brother Carl. Grand Rising, Mark of Anaheim. Listen, I have 3 questions. You could take one or any of them or none of them. But first of all, let me thank you for all you do and have done, sir. God bless you and keep you and yours. First question. There's rumors on circulating on social media about Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, being dead or missing or something like that. You know, he hasn't been on the scene lately. That's one subject I want to ask you about. The other thing, a second subject, is about there was a congressional budget office meeting on March 11th, and they talked about Social Security, the Old Age Survivors Insurance Trust Fund being exhausted in 6 years, 2032, a year earlier than it previously projected. I wanted to ask you if you had any thoughts about that. And the other subject was the role of technology in this Iran war. On C-SPAN, I was watching this retired Brigadier General Leslie Beavers, on the role of technology. She used to be a Department of Defense acting chief information officer, and she talked about how cyber or technology has no geographic boundaries, and how they try to create fog and friction in the mind of the adversary or whatever. And she didn't say this, but somebody else brought up the possibility of AI playing a role in those children, those girls getting killed over there in Iran, at the school. Forgive me, I'm a little nervous, but those were these things. If you got any thoughts, and thank you for bringing up, Ralph Bunche too, and his role in the creation of Israel. He used to teach. He was a professor at Howard University back in the day.
Oh, of course he was, Mr. Boulay. Of course the Boulay was a teacher at Howard University. I know all you Howard folks are listening. I know all you Boulay folks are listening. I couldn't care less. All right, so Netanyahu, rumors. I have no information on that, so I'm not going to lie to you folks. Number two, Social Security. The far right and the libertarians have been trying to destroy the federal government for years. And what they've been going after is the Veterans Administration, U.S. Postal Service, Social Security. And they're doing a good job of destroying it. And with those coming in, they have all of our information. They're stealing your money. The system wasn't going bankrupt, and if the system had been in place the way it's supposed to be, it would be solvent. They've been using money from Social Security to fund a lot of the wars and then never put the money back. So they're purposely bankrupting Social Security. Last, the role of technology. I've been hearing from credible sources that